The name on the draft paper was Lev Oren, and the conscription officer read it aloud without looking up. Kael stepped forward. She kept her shoulders square and her chin level, the way Lev always did when he wanted to look taller than he was. The officer glanced at her once, at the rough-cut hair, the travel-stained jerkin, the draft chit sealed with her family's ring, and then made a mark in his ledger. Oren, Dragon Corps, report to the garrison paddock at first bell. That was all. 23 names called, 23 young people processed, and the officer moved on. Kael walked toward the paddock gate and did not let herself look back at the crowd behind the railing, where her mother's face was a white smear, and Lev was gripping the iron bar with both hands. He was 15. He would have gone if she'd let him. He would have stood exactly where she was standing and tried to be brave, and the Dragon Corps would have taken one look at him and known. Kael was 18. She had been feeding and handling their family's 2 draft toxins since she was 6, and she had the wrists to prove it. She'd also been the one who calmed the older ox when the farrier came, and the one their father called when a chain broke and the weight needed holding. That was the calculation she'd made in the hour after the draft notice arrived. It was not a complicated one. The garrison paddock was nothing like what she'd imagined. She had pictured dragons penned behind iron bars, restless and enormous. What she found instead was a wide, open-sided barn with packed earth floors and high timber ceilings strung with ventilation panels that let in broad bars of morning light. 6 dragons occupied individual bays along the left wall. 4 of them were young, big-shouldered and rough-scaled, the awkward size between hatchling and adult, tails twitching at the newcomer's smell. The 5th was a female with amber scales and a fresh-healed wound along her left flank that had been treated with pitch. The 6th stood at the far end of the paddock, separated from the others by a full 4 bays of empty space. He was old. That much was obvious from 100 meters away. The scales had gone from whatever color they'd been in youth to a deep charcoal laced with silver, each one slightly raised at the edges the way shingles weather after decades of rain. The spines along the ridge of his back were worn blunt. His left foreleg showed a long, old scar that had healed raised and thick, pulling the shoulder forward at rest. He was the size of a river barge, and he was lying down, and he watched the line of recruits enter with eyes that were the pale amber of old bone. The garrison master, a compact woman named Tor, stopped in front of the 6 bays and counted heads. "You'll be paired today. Dragon Corps runs bonded pairs, Rider and Drake, matched by the dragon's choice, not yours. If a Drake ignores you, move on. If one shows interest, stand still. Do not touch without permission. We'll start at Bay 1. Kael stood in the middle of the line and watched the 4 young Drakes sniff and dismiss each recruit in turn. The amber female showed interest in a broad-shouldered boy from the eastern reaches and pressed her forehead once against his shoulder before Tor marked it down. One of the young males selected no one. Then Tor said, "The last is Vaar. He has not bonded in 3 conscription rounds. He is not required to select anyone. He is here because he chooses to be." Kael had not planned to approach the old Drake. She'd planned to be selected by one of the young males, unremarkable, easy to manage. But the line shuffled forward and the recruits moved in sequence, and then she was at the end of the paddock, 4 meters from Vaar, and there was no one left to stand between them. He looked at her, not the casual sniffing and dismissal of the younger Drakes. He looked at her the way her grandmother used to look at things she wanted to understand, patient, unhurried, thorough. Kael stood still. Vaar exhaled through his nostrils, a long breath that stirred the straw on the ground between them. Then he put his chin down on the earth, which brought his eyes level with her face, and he kept looking. "He's never done that," Tor said quietly from behind her. The first week was theory, anatomy, bonding protocols, voice cues, the hand signals used in flight formation. Kael learned fast because she'd always learned fast, and because the alternative was being noticed for the wrong reasons. She sat at the back of the instruction hall, gave short answers when called on, and spent every free hour in the paddock. Vaar was always awake when she arrived. She suspected he never fully slept, or slept in a way that still included watching, one eye on the door while the rest of him rested. She'd seen old animals do that. She brought him what the garrison kitchen spared, usually scraps of dried fish and grain meal that the younger drakes wouldn't touch, but that Vaar accepted without ceremony. She didn't talk much at first. She just sat near him and worked on whatever was in front of her, mending her riding straps, sorting flight harness buckles, sharpening the short blade every corps rider carried. After 3 days, he began to shift his body slightly when she sat down, not toward her exactly, but angled so that the wind from the eastern paddock door didn't reach her directly. On the 4th day she said quietly, "You know, don't you?" He didn't move. His eyes tracked to her and then away, toward the ventilation panels and the pale morning sky beyond. "I'm not him," she said. "The name on the papers, I'm not him." She set down the buckle she was working on. "He's 15. He would have broken." Vaar breathed out through his nose again, that long, slow exhale, and then he turned his head and pressed his forehead against her shoulder. Not hard, just there. She sat very still for a moment. Then she put her hand against the side of his jaw, careful, the way she'd learned you touched something old and worn that still held its own weight. He let her. The corps assignment came in the 3rd week, scouting the Drevath Pass, where 3 villages had gone silent after a series of raids from the highland packs. Not a combat mission, Tor told them, but the distinction felt thin. The highland packs were feral drakes, fast, territorial, and unpredictable when cornered. They'd broken 2 scouting pairs the previous season. Kael was assigned to Vaar. The other 3 pairs were the amber female and her eastern boy, and 2 of the young males with riders who'd been in the corps a year already. They flew out at first light, the garrison dropping behind them as Vaar climbed into the cold air above the valley. Kael had ridden the draft toxin bareback since childhood. She had ridden nothing with wings. For the first 10 minutes she held on with both hands and focused entirely on not falling, and then something in her spine stopped fighting the motion, and she found the rhythm and her grip loosened, and the valley spread out below her like a cloth shaken flat. Vaar flew level and unhurried, the way everything about him was unhurried. She could feel the power in the wing strokes even through the saddle leather, not the frantic energy of the young drakes, which she could see in the pair ahead of them, climbing and banking and showing off, but something much older and more certain. Like a water wheel, she thought. The wheel didn't rush. It just turned and the water moved. The Drevath Pass opened between 2 ridges of gray stone, and the first village was 2 hours in. Empty. Not destroyed, the hearths were cold, the doors closed, the animals gone or hidden. A water trough had been left full, which meant the departure had been fast. Kael noted that and said nothing. Tor had told them to observe and report, not interpret. The 2nd village was the same. The 3rd was not. The highland pack was 12 strong, and they were already in the village square when the scouting pairs arrived above the ridge. The village wasn't empty. Kael could see movement in the buildings, people pressed against shuttered windows, a child's face at a gap in a doorway. The pack hadn't attacked yet. They were circling the square in that particular pattern she recognized from watching the oxen when a strange animal came near the pasture. Not aggression, not retreat, just a held tension waiting for something to break. She found out what they were waiting for when she saw the eastern boy's amber-scaled drake make her entrance over the ridge, banner colors out in standard scouting formation. The pack's attention snapped upward instantly, and the circling tightened. They'd been waiting for a challenge, and now they had one. "Pull back," one of the experienced riders called across the wind. "Signal a return and pull back. We don't engage. We don't have the numbers." The amber drake didn't pull back. She was already diving, the boy on her back 2 weeks in the corps and clearly not yet trained for this, his hands on the reins in the wrong position for a descent. She hit the square low and fast and scattered the pack's front edge, and then the pack closed behind her. Kael had maybe 4 seconds to think. Vaar was already banking, reading the same thing she was reading. She felt it in his wings before she gave any signal, the subtle shift in angle that meant he was choosing a line. She pressed her knees in and leaned forward and said, "Yes." He folded and dropped. What she understood later was that old things that have survived know how to move in a way that young things don't. The young drakes in the pack were fast. Vaar was not trying to be fast. He dropped into the center of the square not with speed but with weight, the particular gravity of something that had been in the air for 20 years and knew exactly how much room it needed. And when he spread his wings at the last moment, the displacement of air hit the pack's rear flank like a wall. Drakes scatter from that, even feral ones. There's something in it, some old signal that registers as apex and says move. 3 of the pack broke left, 4 broke right. The amber drake scrambled free in the gap, the boy on her back holding on by the harness loops and nothing else. The remaining 5 regrouped and turned toward Vaar, heads low, threat displays going, and Kael felt Vaar pull himself up to his full height, not lunging, not striking, just standing, the old scarred line of him in the morning sun coming over the ridge, and he made a sound she had never heard him make. It was not a roar, something below that, felt more than heard, the way thunder arrived in the ground before it arrived in the air. The 5-pack drake stopped. 3 seconds. Then the pack turned, all 12, and went back up the ridge without another display. The amber drake sat panting in the middle of the square. The eastern boy slid off her back and sat down on the ground and put his head between his knees. One of the shuttered windows opened, and a woman's face looked out, and then more windows, and then the village square filled with cautious movement. Kael sat on Vaar's back, still forward-leaning, her hands flat on his neck, and let the next several breaths happen. They debriefed at the garrison that evening. The garrison master heard the experienced rider's account first, then the eastern boy's halting version, then turned to Kael. "Oran," Tor said, "your call on the descent." "Vaar's call," Kael said. "I said yes." Tor looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Vaar, who was standing at the paddock entrance behind Kael with the stillness he carried everywhere. "In 3 core cycles," Tor said, "I have not seen Vaar drop into a live pack conflict. He refused every time." She paused. "What did you say to him?" "Yes," Kael said again. Tor was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Report to my office after evening feeding, alone." She stood across the desk from Tor and did not offer anything and waited. Tor set the draft ledger open between them. "Lev Oran," she read. 15 years, eastern farmhold, brown eyes." She looked up. "You have green eyes." Kael said nothing. "The regulation," Tor said, "is very clear about impersonation. I could have you removed tonight." She turned the ledger page. "The regulation says nothing about what I do with the information before I act on it." She folded her hands on the desk. "So, tell me who you are." Kael told her. Not everything, not the fear that had made the calculation easy, not the image of Lev's hands on the railing, but the core of it. The name, the age, the reason. Tor listened without interruption. When Kael was done, the garrison master was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How long have you been handling large animals?" "Since I was 6. The drop you called today, or that Vaar called and you agreed to, saved 4 people from a pack closure, possibly more." Tor tapped the ledger page. "I have a problem with impersonation. I have a different problem with discharging the rider Vaar chose after 3 cycles of refusing everyone." She closed the ledger. "I need your real name in my records. Nothing else changes." "Kael Oran," she said. "Not Lev Kael." Tor wrote it down. She went back to the paddock afterward. It was late, the ventilation panels dark, the younger drakes settled and quiet. Vaar was lying down in his bay, head up, watching the entrance the way he always watched the entrance. When she sat against the wall beside his head, he exhaled slowly and closed his eyes almost all the way. Not all the way, just almost. She sat with her knees pulled up and thought about what came next, the real name in the ledger, the real rider on a very old Drake's bond record, whether she could learn fast enough to do this right. It was a large thought. She set it aside. What remained after she set it aside was smaller and cleaner. The weight of Vaar's breath in the air beside her, and the morning light that would come through the ventilation panels when it came, and the thing she had agreed to that she had not been asked. She had come here as someone else. She would stay as herself. Somewhere behind her, in a farmhold she'd left at dawn 3 weeks ago, Lev was eating supper with their mother and not knowing how the draft had gone because she hadn't sent word yet. She would. Tomorrow. She would find the right words for it. Vaar breathed out a long, slow breath, and the straw around them stirred, and the garrison was quiet, and the night passed.